The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, welcome all you fellow wanderers.
Just a quick bit of housekeeping before we get into tonight's episode. If you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star review and a comment on whatever platform you listen to us on. Or you can go directly to our website and leave us a review there. We would really appreciate it.
We would, and it's a great way to show your support for our show. It just takes a couple minutes, and it's totally free to do. But while you're at our website, if you go that route, you could also check out our merchandise that we have for sale in our store, which is a tab up at the top of our website, which is whereourmindswander.com.
Or, if you'd like, just send us an email and say hi.
We love that, too.
Alrighty, Beth. What did you delve into tonight for your story?
Well, I haven't yet. Would you like me to start?
Yeah.
Okay, I can do that.
That might be helpful to all our listeners.
The white 3-story Greek Revival Victorian-style mansion at 1016 West Warner Avenue in Guthrie, Oklahoma, is gorgeous. It's our kind of house. 117 years old, wraparound porches on both the first and second story, columns in the front, and beautiful wood-paneled walls and ornate fireplaces on the inside. It's a house that you know just has a rich history. And if you're like us, it's a house that, after just one look, would cause you to say, it's gotta be haunted. And you'd be right on both counts. It does have a pretty cool history, and it is definitely haunted. It also happens to be a bed and breakfast called the Stone Lion Inn, which is kind of cool because anyone can stay there and possibly have a paranormal experience of their own. The 8,000-square-foot Stone Lion Inn was built in 1907 and has 6 guest rooms as well as a parlor and dining area. There's also an odd-looking kind of table sitting inside the house as soon as you enter, and it never fails to be a good conversation piece. And that's for good reason, since it's an embalming table. Why would a bed and breakfast have an embalming table? Well, let me start with the history of not just the house, but Guthrie in general. According to wanderwisdom.com, Guthrie had a population of just 10 people prior to 1889. But on April 22nd, the Oklahoma land race happened. Now, for those of you who may not remember your high school history class lessons, the Oklahoma land race allowed people to pay an entrance fee, then literally race thousands of other people in their wagons and on their horses towards tracts of land that they wanted to claim and homestead for 5 years. They'd literally drive stakes into the ground, staking their claim, to indicate which land they wanted to try their luck homesteading. The population of Guthrie swelled to 10,000 on just that single day. It basically became a tent city until homesteaders could build more permanent homes. Guthrie became a bona fide Wild West town. And in 1906, Frederick Ernest Houghton was one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest man in town. Having made his fortune by owning several mercantile stores and married to his second wife, Bertha, 53-year-old Houghton had 12 children to care for. Sparing no expense, he decided to buy the piece of property next to the home they already lived in, and to build a mansion fit for a king of consumerism. He spent $11,000 on his new home, which would be a little under $275,000 today. So, not a huge amount of money, but it was still the most expensive and biggest house in Guthrie when it was completed in 1907. As I had mentioned, the white 3-story house was in the Greek Revival Victorian style, so it has columns in the front and a porch on each level. Inside, there was oak paneling in the dining room and 3 grand fireplaces. There was also a neoclassical-style staircase for the family to use and servant stairs for their 2 hired servants. The bookcases were lined with leaded glass, and each room was connected by pocket doors. The original layout included a ballroom and a playroom on the top floor. The Houghtons employed 2 servants, Lucinda Cooper, who was the maid and cook, and her husband, Asbury C. Cooper, who worked as the coachman. Now, according to the Haunted Attic UK, 3 of the Houghton children died in the house: Irene, Marjorie, and Gordon. The girls passed away in 1910 and Gordon in 1912. And this is where things get a little murky. Legend has said for decades that their daughter Irene passed away at the age of 8. She came down with whooping cough. The hired nurse accidentally gave her an overdose of cough medicine. Since cough medicine in those days often contained heroin, cocaine, and morphine, you could see how this could happen. I'm not kidding, by the way. Bayer actually marketed cough syrup containing heroin in it for over 30 years. And they marketed it as effective for children. Anyway, the legend is that Irene died due to this overdose. However, other sites I looked at retold the same story, but about another Houghton child named Augusta, not Irene. Now, for those of you who have been listening to us for a while, you know that we try to verify everything. So when I tried to search Frederick Ernest Houghton, I found very little other than find a grave. But listed there are just 7 of his children, none of whom were named Irene or Augusta. There was a Cora Augusta, but she lived to be 81 and she passed away in 1974. Now, they did have a son named Adolf Theodore, who they called Ted, who was born in 1902, the same year Irene should have been born if she died at age 8 in 1910. So, if Irene did exist, maybe she and Ted were twins. Find a grave is great if you are literally trying to find a grave of someone who has passed away, but I don't rely on them for research purposes, so I decided to see what else I could find. Census records seem to be the next option, but after looking for a really long time, I couldn't find anything helpful. So, it's a bit of a mystery as far as the legend goes, whether Irene Houghton died at age 8 or if she ever existed at all. It's also interesting that the name Augusta is also tied to the legend. Was there an Augusta as well? Or does Cora Augusta explain the name switch? Either way, it does matter, and I'll get into why in a little bit. So, both Frederick and Bertha Houghton passed away in the home, and eventually, after suffering some financial difficulties, the Houghton children sold their mansion. It was briefly used during World War I as a makeshift hospital. Then, by the 1920s, an undertaker moved in, using the basement as the morgue. Job and Mary Smith moved from Albany, Missouri, to a farm east of Guthrie in 1893. Already in the funeral business, Job used his wagon and mules to transport bodies to the cemetery. In 1929, they purchased the Houghton Mansion, and with his partner, Job opened the Smith Gooch Funeral Home. Within 4 months, Gooch left, and Job and Mary continued the business themselves. By 1936, they had moved out of the Houghton Mansion to their current location on North 1st Street, and the Smith Gallo Funeral Home is still in operation today. So that I thought was amazing too, that the Smith family funeral home has been in operation since 1893, and it's still there. But remember that embalming table just inside the Stone Lion Inn? Well, it's a remnant of the home's former funeral parlor days. After the Smiths left the mansion, it became a boarding house for many years. Then it was a single-family home once again when the Walker family bought it. And then, in 1986, a woman named Becky Luker purchased it. She said on Ocali.com that she noticed that Guthrie didn't have a bed and breakfast when she arrived from Santa Fe. Within 3 days, she purchased the former Houghton Mansion, believing it was the perfect spot to open one. On the day of the closing, as she walked around the house with Mrs. Walker, the former owner, the two women chatted about all the furniture having been auctioned off. Becky asked Mrs. Walker about the strange porcelain table left behind. Mrs. Walker said she wasn't sure what it was used for, but that she didn't have room for it, so it should stay with the house. Perhaps a spirit or two stayed behind with it, because it quickly became apparent the second that renovations started that the house was haunted. Becky planned on restoring the mansion to its former glory, and she did. But the renovation crews weren't too keen on the unexplained stuff that seemed to happen while they worked. All throughout the day, they'd hear noises, footsteps, and slamming doors. But since everyone was working, it could be explained. Except, after the workers left for the day, the footsteps and door slammings continued. According to hauntedrooms.com, loud footsteps would clomp up and down the back staircase very early in the morning, too, before anyone had shown up to work on the house. Doors would inexplicably open and shut on their own. Convinced more than once that intruders were actually in the house, Becky called the police several times, only to have them come and find nothing. She didn't live there alone while the renovations were going on, by the way. She had her mother staying there, as well as her son, Grant. When Grant was 10, he began telling his mother that he saw people in the kitchen. Initially, she chalked it up to his imagination, but then his toys started doing weird things. Grant would reportedly put every single one of his toys away in the large closet up on the 3rd floor. But by morning, dozens of his toys would be scattered all over the place. HauntedHouses.com adds to the story, saying that around 10 p.m. each night, a child's footsteps could be heard on the back staircase, heading to the playroom, followed by the sound of the playroom door opening. Becky allegedly put a lock on the playroom door, and yet the toys would still end up outside the closet and all over the floor. News Channel 8 at KTUL.com reported that when Grant was 14, the front door to the house kept slamming shut. Grant would open it back up, and again it would slam shut. Thinking it was just a breeze, Grant put an old iron doorstop in front of it to keep it open. The doorstop moved as though being shoved out of the way, and the door slammed once again. When the renovations were complete, Becky and her business partner, Michelle Smith, opened the Stone Lion Inn and eagerly awaited their guests. Offering 6 deluxe rooms and yummy food, they didn't have to wait very long. Except, guests were checking out in the middle of the night. Some said they couldn't deal with the little girl touching their face, or pulling their hair, or their feet, or tugging the sheets off of them as they tried to sleep. Some complained that if it was a non-smoking establishment, how come all they smelled was cigar smoke, and in some instances they could see the actual smoke drifting by in little clouds. Some complained about the constantly laughing children in the hallway, and that when they went to see whose children they were, they couldn't find any children, or any other guests for that matter. Those who did stay the night often came to breakfast with the same question. Did Becky have a little girl? Because a little girl woke them up that morning. Or they'd nonchalantly mention that they put their glasses down somewhere in the house, but when they reached for them, they weren't there. They found them eventually across the room. According to the Haunted Attic UK, some guests have asked who kept rolling a wooden ball across the floor above their heads for hours on end, or why someone kept rewinding and playing a music box all night. A confused Becky insisted that there wasn't a single music box in the entire inn. Becky's business partner, Michelle Smith, has had her own experiences in the house. According to the Ocali.com website, Smith claims that she's been locked in the basement while doing laundry several times. She said, quote, "The first time I was doing laundry down there and the door locked on me. I sat down there for a while before someone came home and heard me. It happened a couple more times, but I remembered to use another exit I forgot about the first time whenever it happened again. I prop things up against the door so it won't happen again." End quote. The basement was also the spot where one of the employees had an eerie experience. According to the hauntedattic.uk, the housekeeper was down in the basement when she saw a dark figure standing by a bucket of water. This figure wore a top hat, and the bucket at his feet continuously overflowed with water, spilling all over the floor. Smith also mentions that doors in the house will open and close, except they always do so in the same order and in sequence, as though someone is walking through the house. When Smith's daughter was 5, she liked to play upstairs by herself. When Smith asked her once what she was doing by herself all day, the little girl replied that she was playing with the other little girl. When Smith asked, "What other little girl?" her daughter replied, quote, "The one who likes to play upstairs." End quote. When the women purchased a second property and were spending less time in the Stone Lion Inn, the house seemed to take offense. A putrid smell filled the entire mansion. Despite scrubbing the floors and using copious amounts of bleach to scour every surface they could think of, the stench remained. Finally, Smith told Becky she needed to explain things to the house. Becky said, quote, "I sat down on the staircase and told the house we weren't leaving for good, and we would be back on the weekends. And it stopped." End quote. Despite the ghostly happenings, the Stone Lion Inn was thriving, especially when the women began hosting murder mystery dinners that Becky wrote herself. Participants memorize their own lines and come in costume in order to make the whole thing more immersive. They have proven to be incredibly successful. As you can imagine, people like to take a lot of pictures during an event like that, and the ghosts like being photographed too. Although the outcome can sometimes be downright creepy, like one photo Becky refers to. She said that in it, a couple is sitting together in a chair, and rising between them is a man's head with a hat on. Perhaps it's the same man that the housekeeper saw in the basement. Perhaps it's Frederick Houghton. Paranormal groups seem to think so, because, as you can imagine, the inn's reputation as a haunted house quickly made the rounds, and eager paranormal investigators came from all over the country to investigate, and still do. They believe that the male entity is Mr. Houghton, and that the little girl is Irene Houghton, the same Irene who may or may not have died at age 8 from the cough syrup overdose. However, as I said, many websites who discuss the Stone Lion Inn refer to her as Augusta. One paranormal group, OKPRI, conducted their own investigation back in 2018, according to the News Channel 8 report. Apparently, the camera operator, Andre, claimed that while everyone was in the main room of the inn, he saw a paper towel roll go flying across the kitchen out of the corner of his eye. The sound of it bouncing off the counter can be heard in their audio recording. But that's not all they caught on audio. They actually recorded several EVPs, a few of which said things like, "Do you hear what they are saying? I'm dead. I'm scared." And "Sarah, good sister." You can hear them for yourself, actually, on their website, and their link is in our show notes. It's the ktul.com one. So, at least one guest had a very positive interaction with a ghost in the inn. Allegedly, as she was getting ready for bed one night, she ended up leaving the ceiling fan light on because no matter what she did, she couldn't get it to turn off. Once she was in bed and closed her eyes, she felt a weight on the bed by her feet, as though someone was standing on it, and the light clicked off. Now, I'm sorry to say that Becky Luker passed away very recently, in February of this year, but her son Grant is continuing to run the Stone Lion Inn. The Stone Lion Inn is truly beautiful, and it doesn't advertise itself as a, quote, haunted hotel, although it does seem to be on every haunted hotel list in Oklahoma. And I just think it sounds like a cool place.
It does sound like a really cool place to go spend a weekend.
Yeah. And I was happily surprised by the amount of information about the different experiences that they've had. There was a lot of stuff about the hauntings.
which is abnormal.
It's unusual. Yeah, usually we get a lot of history and then very vague stuff like doors close,
Yeah.
So this was great that there was so much.
Well, it's sad to hear of Becky's passing because she sounded like she really loved the place and she was really doing well there.
Yeah, and I was glad to see, though, that Grant is taking it over. He probably ran it with her for a while, but he's continuing to run the hotel.
What I like is the last story, though, because it does sound like something a child would do, stand up on the bed to turn the ceiling fan or the light off.
Yeah.
On the ceiling fan.
Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder if Becky will make an appearance in her afterlife back at her hotel.
Maybe. It's possible.
Guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah.
Excellent story, dear.
Thank you.
And we'll be back right after this quick break.
Hey, did you know? On June 28, 2009, astrophysicist Stephen Hawking held a party at the University of Cambridge, complete with balloons, champagne, and snacks. Except he sent out the invitations for his party the day after the party was held. He also hoped that the invitations would survive for thousands of years. What could possibly explain such strange behavior from such a gifted mind? Well, because the party was for time travelers, and Hawking theorized that in the future, at least one time traveler would find the invitation and travel via wormhole to attend his soiree. After all, if time travel were possible, he should have had guests. Hawking waited 2 hours for any party guests to show up, and when none did, he went home. He called the party a total success, saying it proved that time travel was not possible. Who'da thunk it? All right, we are back. And I'm dying to know, where did your mind wander?
Well, tonight, I'm going to be talking about a phenomenon that totally creeps me out, but I find so fascinating.
All right, I can't wait to hear it.
It's a crisp, late fall afternoon as you walk along the shores of the Northumberland Strait. The gulls call from overhead. The lone lighthouse sends its guiding light out to the sea. You stop for a moment to enjoy the watercolor sky, its brilliant red, deep orange, and rosy pink. You zip up your jacket against the bracing wind and look back out over the water. From out of nowhere, a dark shape has sailed into view, black against the horizon and deepening shades of the autumn sunset. You count 4 masts on the magnificent ship before it changes course and sails straight towards the shore and you. Admiring the beautiful schooner, you hardly register the second fiery glow that is barely visible near the ship. But as you try to figure out why something doesn't look quite right, you realize that the fiery glow is part of the ship. In fact, the fire is quickly spreading up all 4 masts at the same time, and before you can even blink, the entire boat appears engulfed in flames. Shouts reach your ears, carried on the wind. Horror fills you as the realization sinks in. The beautiful schooner is on fire, and the crew, whoever they are in mortal danger. Maybe you turn towards the lighthouse, unsure what to do. Maybe you whip out your cell phone, ready to call for help. But as you glance back up, confusion fills in. The ship is gone. In just that split second, the burning schooner has vanished. There's no way that it sank that quickly. It's just not possible. At the very least, there should still be clouds of smoke in the sky. It's as if the ship disappeared. For over 200 years, people along the Northumberland Strait have been telling tales of the burning ghost ship. Because that's what it is, a phantom schooner that seems to appear out of thin air and disappear into thin air just as quickly. So tonight, I'm going to tell you the legend of the Northumberland Ghost Ship. The Northumberland Strait is a body of tidal water between Prince Edward Island, the coast of eastern New Brunswick, and the northern coast of Nova Scotia. The Northumberland Strait stretches 225 kilometers, or 139.8 miles, between Prince Edward Island and mainland Canada, from Richibucto Cape, New Brunswick, to Cape George, Nova Scotia. Its width ranges from 13 kilometers to 43 kilometers, or from 8 miles to 26.7 miles, and it has a depth of 68 meters, or 223 feet, at its deepest point. And ever since a lighthouse keeper documented the ghost ship in 1786, people have been reporting the burning ghost ship all along the Northumberland Strait, even as recently as 2008. So, who knows how many people have seen it and not reported it, or how recently it was last spotted? According to nsghoststories.com, the very first documented sighting was by the lighthouse keeper of the Sea Cow Head Lighthouse on Prince Edward Island. During a terrible storm, the keeper was horrified to see a 3-masted schooner on fire, its white sails fully engulfed, as it battled the stormy seas and lashing rain. The strong winds pushed the burning ship closer and closer towards the rocks at the cliffside. Utterly helpless, the lighthouse keeper watched as the ship came terribly close to being splintered into pieces. But then, for no reason he could see, the ship somehow turned around and, still completely on fire, disappeared. The most popular account of the Northumberland Ghost Ship comes from the year 1900, according to the article Canadian Urban Legends, The Flaming Ghost Ship of Prince Edward Island by Allie Turner. A group of sailors in Charlottetown on Prince Edward Island noticed a white-sailed ship on the horizon that was on fire. They could see the crew desperately trying to climb the mast just to get away from the flames. The sailors jumped into a rowboat and rowed as fast as they could towards the burning vessel, hoping to rescue the doomed crew. But as they got closer, the burning ship just disappeared. Another encounter occurred just 4 years later in 1904. This encounter wasn't reported until 1954, though, when it appeared in an issue of Fate magazine.
Gotta love Fate magazine. Did you try finding the issue online so we could buy it?
Well, of course I did, but I couldn't find it anywhere.
Bummer.
I know. So, according to mysteriesofcanada.com, Fate magazine published an article called The Phantom Ship by Roy Grant. Grant, who lived in Bermuda, told a story about his father. In 1904, his father and 6 other men were on a schooner in the Northumberland Strait just after sunset. It was still dusk, and as his father steered the boat, one of his crewmates yelled at him to look out. Out of nowhere, another schooner had appeared, not 200 yards off their bow. It was heading away from them, and when it had put about a half a mile between them, it suddenly burst into flames. They'd heard of the infamous ghost ship, and they decided to sail after it. Except, no matter how they tried, the burning ship outpaced them. But the whole time, they could see the sails and rigging was on fire, and the deck was on fire. But a lone figure of a man kept pacing across the deck, as though nothing could harm him. They kept trying to catch up, but they couldn't. And they watched in wonder as the ship seemed to sink lower and lower into the water, even as it continued sailing away from them. When all they could see was just the tip of the mast, the single burning flame divided into 3 separate fireballs that skipped off across the water in 3 different directions, before coming back together into a single fire. All 7 of them watched in amazement as the ghost ship reappeared in the center of the fire and seemed to detach itself from the flames and sail on completely unharmed. Sightings continued for the next several decades, including several in Glengarry, Ontario, along the St. Lawrence River, which connects to the Northumberland Strait. But they really picked up in the mid-60s. According to nsghoststories.com, a witness in Cape John, Nova Scotia, saw the ship in November of 1965. It was dusk, and as the witness was finishing up some housework, they happened to look out the window. Sailing down the strait was a ship on fire. Since they were right next to the phone, they called various neighbors to ask if they were also seeing the burning ghost ship. They all confirmed that they did, and soon, people within a 6-mile stretch of the coastline ran outside to watch the ship sail by. They were joined by carloads of curious phantom ship seekers who parked along the Cape Road to see if they could catch sight of it too. And they did. And collectively, their sightings lasted for 2 hours. There's no record of just how many people did catch a glimpse of the ghost ship, but 2 nights later, it reappeared, giving even more people a chance. All of them watched in disbelief as the ship just faded into nothing in front of their eyes. In 1973, a Prince Edward Island man named Marvin McLeod was driving home from Murray Harbor around 12:30 a.m. Since it was hunting season, he had binoculars in his car, so when he spotted a 3-masted schooner out in the strait that looked like it was on fire, he was able to see it quite clearly. According to nsghoststories.com, he said, quote, "I could see what happened to be a 3-masted schooner with its sails on fire and people running around the deck and jumping overboard. I was about to head home and call the Coast Guard when it up and disappeared before my eyes." Murray Harbor proved to be a good spot for seeing the ghost ship again in October of 1978. Leanne Patton, the last lighthouse keeper at Woods Island, got an unexpected phone call from one of his neighbors, Bernice Smith. Bernice demanded to know what he was burning, and when Patton replied that he wasn't burning anything, Bernice told him to look outside. When he did, he caught sight of the burning ship sailing past. Then, like it always had before, the ghost ship seemed to just disappear. The 1980s didn't disappoint either. Larry Hooper, who lived in Murray River, spotted the Northumberland ghost ship in October as well, while he was on board the Prince Nova, a ferry boat that runs between Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Maine. It was a clear night around 10 p.m., and while he was on the bridge, he suddenly saw a schooner that was overrun by frantic sailors trying to get away from a fire that was engulfing the boat. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it disappeared. In January of 1988, passengers aboard the ferry saw the ghost ship again, but the ferry's radar picked up absolutely nothing in the water. So, with all of these sightings, there have been some commonalities. The burning ship is a stunning, white-sailed schooner. Some witnesses say it has 3 masts, while others say that it has 4. But, for the most part, everyone agrees that it's a schooner. Most accounts claim that her sails are always at full mast as they burn, and they are always white. Many witnesses claim that they could see sailors on board, and that all of them seem to be doing what sailors would be doing during an emergency. But others claim that the sailors they saw didn't seem to be bothered by the inferno around them at all. They seemed to be carrying on their duties as if nothing was wrong. Most of the sightings occurred during the fall months, and several mention hearing the sound of phantom cannons firing before they actually see the ship. The fire often comes together to form a fireball that can be seen for miles. Despite all the possibly hundreds of sightings, no one has determined what real-life ship might now be the ghost ship. According to Turner's article, author Roland H. Sherwood wrote in his 1984 book, Story Parade, that one contender might be a pleasure craft that caught on fire after drunk passengers knocked over a lamp. Or, he suggests, it could have been a passenger ship carrying both nuns and priests that was set on fire by pirates. Obviously, both of these explanations could be deemed a little far-fetched. NSGhostStories.com suggests that the ghost ship could still be tied to pirates. They propose that the British Navy sank a pirate ship and it became the Northumberland Ghost Ship. Blogger C. Wesley Clough suggests that maybe she was a French warship. Her own crew may have set her on fire to save her from falling into British hands. When it comes to specific known vessels, though, there is one name that pops up pretty often: Le Chameau, which is French for the camel. The Camel was a French naval ship built in 1717 with the purpose of transporting French citizens to New France, otherwise known as Canada. She was 130 feet long and 31 feet wide, and she was outfitted with 44 cannons. However, she wasn't a schooner. She was a man of war. For someone who doesn't know a lot about sailing vessels, the two ships can look kind of similar, at least when it comes to their sails. Schooners are low to the water, though, while man-of-wars are bulkier and taller. Anyways, the Camel carried both goods and passengers from France to the French colony in North America. But in 1725, she was caught in a horrific summer storm. She had left La Rochelle, France, on her way to Nova Scotia, carrying a huge stash of gold and silver coins. She also carried at least a couple hundred passengers, including a few government and religious officials. But as the storm raged, she ran aground on some rocks several miles east of Louisbourg, Nova Scotia. Everyone aboard perished. The death toll was anywhere from 216 to 316 people. Salvage efforts brought up 180 bodies soon after. But running aground and catching on fire are two different catastrophes. And as far as the records show, the Camel did not suffer from both. So, is the Camel really the Northumberland Ghost Ship? No one really knows, although some experts in the scientific realm offer other explanations for the burning ship phenomenon. As long ago as 1905, Canadian botanist, historian, and cartographer William Francis Ganong gave a simple explanation for what people were seeing: St. Elmo's fire. St. Elmo's fire happens when the electric field around an object is ionized, usually by lightning. The nitrogen and oxygen in the atmosphere cause the area around the object to look like fluorescent blue or violet light. Ironically, sailors viewed St. Elmo's fire as a good omen. But it doesn't exactly explain the Northumberland Ghost Ship, since the fire witnesses report is red and orange, not blue and purple. And it's not always spotted during storms. Another possible scientific explanation is the moon. According to paranormalenlightenment.com, a crescent moon over the waters of the Northumberland Strait can cause the illusion of a burning ship. They say that the brightness of the moon causes a white glow, and the rippling water can look like flames. Now, I would imagine for many of you out there, you'd probably know by now that we always check into things like that. And despite looking at several optical illusions that made my eyesight go blurry, I couldn't find anything that either showed or talked about this fire on water moon illusion. If any of you know what it's called or where to read about it, drop us an email at whereourmindswander@gmail.com because I'd like to see it. So, if the Northumberland Ghost Ship is an easily explained phenomenon, it doesn't really explain the most recent sighting in January of 2008. The Saltwire website ran a newspaper article from the Truro Daily News about a 17-year-old young man named Matthew Gugier. Matthew was taking part in a Katamavic program in Tatamaguchi. The program sounds really cool. It's where young people between the ages of 17 and 25 go to completely different communities in Canada than they are used to in order to do volunteer work and community service. They stay in these host communities for 5.5 months, so Matthew was used to seeing ships sail by. But it was January, and everything was covered in snow and ice as he came out of a local gym one evening around 10 p.m. His first thought, as he noticed the 3-masted schooner, was that it was cool to see a ship there in the harbor. It was white and gold in color. But then as he realized that a ship being there didn't make any sense, he tried to get a friend to come outside of the gym and look too. His friend, well, she didn't want to stop mid-workout, and by the time Matthew got back outside, the ship was gone. That was the part that really confused him, because he said, based on how close the ship was and how thick the ice was, there was no way it could have made it out of the harbor that fast. The article goes on to mention a Tatamaguchi resident named Melvin Langell, who had his own recent sighting in the month of October. He said, quote, "I saw this ball of flame above the horizon. At first I thought it was a light on land, then realized that it was over the water. I believe in all that stuff, and I don't know what else it would be." End quote. The tale of the Northumberland Ghost Ship has made its way into television programs, newspapers, travel books, and novels. And in 2014, the Canadian government issued 1 million postage stamps depicting the Northumberland Ghost Ship as part of its Haunted Canada series.
That's pretty cool.
It is.
You don't hear about burning, flaming ghost ships very often.
No, you don't. Not flaming ghost ships.
No, not ones that are on fire.
And I think it's pretty cool that the Canadian government put out a stamp.
That is cool that they acknowledge that it's part of their history.
I know. Now it makes me want that too.
A postage stamp?
The Haunted Canada series?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the ghost ship.
Wow.
The Northumberland.
I do have Canadian relatives. I'm sure I could reach out.
I bet you could get your hands on one.
Yeah.
We should check into that.
I'd do that for you.
Well, thanks. That's the thing about this, doing the podcast. We come across so many interesting things and, well, there's so much stuff that I want because of it.
Right. That's why you want stuff.
The scrying mirror we did and so many other things because of the podcast.
Right.
We don't have any room to put anything more, but a postage stamp, well, that's easy.
It's tiny.
Yeah.
You could put that
in an envelope. Right?
Right.
We're going to have to look into this Haunted Canada series.
Well, if you would like to know more about the haunted ghost ship of Northumberland or the Stone Lion Inn, you can always check our sources in our show notes. There's plenty of information there that we didn't cover, so you have plenty to read if you would like to.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to put it all into one episode. This would go on for many episodes. So it's a good place to start with and do some research for yourself.
Yeah, and that's our thought behind it, right? We introduce these things to people who listen to us, and then if they want to know more, they can go look for themselves. Yeah. But now they know about it.
Right, and you can get a good sense of how we feel when you start going down the rabbit hole. And, you could spend hours and then it goes nowhere.
Right.
Or it gets so deep that you just keep going on for days.
Right.
While putting an episode together.
Yes. Yeah, I came out into the kitchen the other night and told you I had just gone down the rabbit hole trying to look up an author of some book because the author was
the guy from Supernatural.
Yes, Jim Beaver from Deadwood and Supernatural. And I was like, I don't think it can be the same Jim Beaver. And so I kept searching and looking, and it really was. He wrote a book about George Reeves, the Superman, the original Superman.
Right. Or you start researching one topic, and the next thing you know, you're completely off topic and into something else because you had no idea that they tied in together.
Right. Oh, the perils of podcast research.
Yeah, but we love it.
We do love it.
Well, with that said, join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you next time.